Hello everyone, today we read and comment the 12th chapter of the 5th book of von Clausewitz, Vom Kriege. Its title being Marches. This is the continuation of the previous chapter and the one before. The text follows. We have now to consider the destructive influence which marches have upon an army. It is so great that it may be regarded as an active principle of destruction just as much as the combat. One single moderate march does not wear down the instrument, but a succession of even moderate marches is certain to tell upon it, and a succession of severe ones will, of course, do so much sooner. At the actual scene of war, want of food and shelter, bad broken up roads, and the necessity of being in a perpetual state of readiness for battle are causes of an excessive strain upon our means, by which men, cattle, carriages of every description, as well as clothing, are ruined. It is commonly said that a long rest does not suit the physical health of an army, that at such a time there is more sickness than during moderate activity. No doubt sickness will and does occur if soldiers are packed too close in confined quarters, but the same thing would occur if there were quarters taken up on the march, and the want of air and exercise can never be the cause of such sickness, as it is so easy to give the soldier both by means of his exercises. Only think for a moment, when the organism of a human being is in disordered and fainting state, what a difference it must make to him whether he falls sick in a house or is seized in the middle of a high road, up to his knees in mud, under torrents of rain, and loaded with a knapsack on his back. Even if he is in a camp, he can soon be sent to the next village, and will not be entirely without medical assistance, whilst on a march he must be for hours without any assistance, and then be made to drag himself along 4 miles as a straggler. How many trifling illnesses by that means become serious, how many serious ones become mortal. Let us consider how an ordinary march in the dust and under the burning rays of a summer sun may produce the most excessive heat, in which state, suffering from intolerable thirst, the soldier then rushes to the fresh spring of water to bring back for himself sickness and death. It is not our object by these reflections to recommend less activity in war. The instrument is there for use, and if the use wears away the instrument, that is only in the natural order of things. We only wish to see everything put in its right place. Excuse me, I honestly got moved when I read this. And to oppose that theoretical bombast according to which the most astonishing surprises, the most rapid movements, the most incessant activity costs nothing, and are painted as rich mines which the indolence of the general leaves unworked. It is very much the same with these mines as with those from which gold and silver are obtained. Nothing is seen but they produce, and no one asks about the value of the work which has brought these produce to light. On long marches outside a theatre of war, the conditions under which the march is made are no doubt usually easier, and the daily losses smaller, but on that account men with the slightest sickness are generally lost to the army for some time, as it is difficult for convalescents to overtake an army constantly advancing. Amongst the cavalry, the number of lame horses and horses with sore backs rises in an increasing ratio, and amongst the carriages many break down or require repair. It never fails, therefore, that at the end of a march of 100 miles or more, an army arrives much weakened, particularly as regards its cavalry and train. If such marches are necessary on the theatre of war, this is under the eyes of the enemy. Then that disadvantage is added to the other, and from the other two combined, the losses with large masses of troops, and under conditions otherwise unfavorable, may amount to something incredible. Only a couple of examples in order to illustrate our ideas. When Bonaparte crossed the Niemen on June 24, 1812, the enormous center of his army, with which he subsequently marched against Moscow, numbered 301,000 men. At Smolensk on August 15th, he detached 13,500, leaving, it is to be supposed, 287,500. The actual state of his army, however, at that date was only 182,000. 182,000, excuse me. He had therefore 105,000. Bearing in mind that up to that time the only two engagements to speak of had taken place, one being the Davout at Bagration, and the other between Murat and Tolstoy-Osterman, we may put down the losses of the French army in action at 10,000 men at most, and therefore the losses in sick and stragglers within 52 days on a march of about 70 miles direct to his front amounted to 95,000, that is, a third part of the whole army. 3 weeks later, at the time of the Battle of Borodino, the loss amounted to 144,000, including the casualties in the battle, and 8 days after that, again at Moscow, the number was 198,000. The losses of this army in general were at the commencement of the campaign at the rate of 1 to 150 daily. Subsequently, they rose to 1 over 120, and in the last period they increased to 1 over 19 of the original strength. The movement of Napoleon from the passage of the Niemen up to Moscow certainly may be called a persistent one. Still, we must not forget that it has lasted 82 days, in which time he only accomplished 120 miles, and that the French army upon 2 occasions made regular halts, once at Vilna for about 14 days and the other time at Vitebsk for about 11 days, during which periods many stragglers had time to rejoin. This 14 weeks advance was not made at the worst season of the year, nor over the worst of roads, for it was summer, and the roads along which they marched were mostly sand. It was the immense mass of troops collected on one road, the want of sufficient subsistence, and an enemy who was on the retreat, but by no means in flight, which were the adverse conditions. Of the retreat of the French army from Moscow to the Niemen we shall say nothing, but this we may mention that the Russian armies following them left Kaluga 120,000 strong and reached Vilna with 30,000. Everyone knows how few men were lost in actual combats during that period. One more example from Blücher's campaign of 1813 in Silesia and Saxony, a campaign very remarkable not for any long march but for the amount of marching to and fro. York's corps of Blücher's army began this campaign on August the 16th, 40,000 strong, and was reduced to 12,000 at the Battle of Leipzig on October the 19th. The principal combats which this corps fought at Goldberg, Lovenberg, and the Katzbach at Wartenburg and Mockern, Leipzig, costed, on the authority of the best writers, 12,000 men. According to that, their losses from other causes in 8 weeks amounted to 16,000 or 2/5 of the whole. We must therefore make up our minds to great wear and tear of our own forces. If we are to carry on a war-reaching movements, we must arrange the rest of our plan accordingly, and above all things, the reinforcements which are to follow. So, beautiful chapter on marches. This is powerful. It punches you because not only the numbers at the end, the historical example of the actual losses, they're not all dead, of course. There were many deserters, as it was known, but this thing that you listen that I got actually honestly emotional while I was reading it. I had to stop and to tailor the audio tracks, because honestly, aside from thinking naturally how von Clausewitz himself died, but well, I'll try to explain you when we arrive to the point actually. But this is on marches. You understand the wearing out that marches can carry out. We've seen in the previous chapters fundamentally how this historicistic perspective of, which is pretty correct, of course, of the increase in kinetic energy, we could say, Napoleonic warfare compared to previous times, and consequently the increase in speed in maneuver. That is something that actually, for huge armies that have never been seen before historically, and that will remain a bit the obsession, in fact, of the military cadres up to World War I, and because of how big the thing had been. And we have to understand it historically speaking, because the 19th century, aside from the end of the Napoleonic Wars, sometimes people say, kind of a Pacific century, because it's one of the bloodiest centuries ever. The Great Wars, but objectively, as far as Europe was concerned, there wasn't the same size sometimes of and intensity of what naturally Napoleonic Wars had been, for all reasons that we can't digress on. They're nothing to do even with the history of the military art specifically. But nevertheless, what we see here is substantially the effect that all this movement has, all this energy, which is immaterial if you want, has on the matter. And those who have it, that are worn out, that is human beings. There are people that die, and how they die, and how the thing simply melts away, also for simply people abandoning, deserting, as you understand. So, okay, chapter 12 marches, and we have now to consider from Clausewitz the destructive influence which marches have upon an army. Destructive. Keep this in mind. It is so great that it may be regarded as an active principle of distraction, just as much as the combat. So this gives you an idea, especially after having read what combat is fundamentally about, how hard, how concrete this effect can be, and how devastating and destructive it can be. Von Clausewitz says, one single moderate march does not wear down the instrument, but a succession of even moderate marches is certain to tell upon it, and a succession of severe ones will, of course, do so much sooner. So here von Clausewitz is referring, still very concretely, of course, much more than what you and me can do, unless you have not been into the actual myth grinder, understand. But honestly, and this is a beautiful concept, because it's literally, every day you count more and more losses, and altogether those are, sounding imposing, and at the end with historical examples that will be even much clearer. But there is one aspect that now von Clausewitz will deepen, that is actually the first thing came to my mind when I read the phrase, that is, think about this not just as the fact, the physical distraction, but properly the exhaustion at so many other levels that a prolonged effort actually brings, right? It's not that human beings are meant to perform over and over again the same thing. Think about training, think even about action. Those are not things that we know. We know it's pretty well known, in the military and beyond, that it's not that if you train a soldier to the infinite, the soldier is actually gonna do increasingly better. There is a point at which excessive training can be even harmful for the same performance, and the same goes exactly for action. We know that, right? It's not that if you're a veteran, it's always, you're going to be cool and capable, right? There are fundamentally, I think, in modern military, 40 days of combat that are devastating enough for saying, okay, this guy's, will never have to do it for his entire life. Naturally, we can't say this because of professionalism, how our armies work today, but of course, think about what a real war for tens of years, like from the French Revolution to 1815 actually was, and what all means also, how this detrimental factor impacts, right, on the performance. So human beings are freaking delicate things, and it's pretty stupid to force to overstrain them in that sense. Yet, and this is the beauty of it, like this is the perspective if you see it from the individual point of view, but as far as the art of war is concerned, as von Clausewitz will explain us now, it could actually be a a dreadful necessity at some point to achieve something greater that will bring to way less losses in comparison to these ones who were being worn out. And I got moved before exactly thinking about this. I mean, the fact that we have, just from an intellectual point of view, this difficulty to look at the bigger picture all the time. We often think that it's that specific thing that makes the difference, that's that specific factor that makes it all. But war is something so complex and on a large scale that not even, I mean, average people cannot encompass with their mind. This is not a matter of even studying it specifically for a lifetime. It's really about, whether you have the capability of knowing how the thing has to freaking work, because work doesn't happen by itself. It's actually done by someone. And the capacities that are needed for someone to lead an army are uniquely, are exceptional, right? An extremely few people in enormous masses are actually capable of performing certain things at a certain level. And it's really, I don't digress on the thing that I could think of it, but in perspective, war is also this enormous strain altogether that the individual usually doesn't contemplate from his own perspective, especially when he's marching and he's exhausted and feels that he's gonna die, right? But the point here is that war doesn't leave you any freaking room for that if you actually want to win it and not dying anyway. Which means, as always, is no game. Or actually, war is a game if you really want to do it, but it's a mortal game. That is to say, you actually die, and it's meant to be like that. Like, it's not to be like that, okay, let's do it, and it's safe, and we will come out of it. No, you already know that a part of you, part of the army is gonna die, right? Not, feeling sick or whatever. No, you're actually, it's over, right? And this tells you how you cannot even think for a second that you matter anything as an individual, unless you are, the head of this, have important posts. But of course, everybody has its own importance. But altogether, the average trooper is actually sacrificable for much greater deeds, and the same actually goes for in another dimension, but still with the same actual criterion for politics, for society, right? It's not that you can't think that war is the only emergential situation that exists out there. First of all, because war is produced by politics and society. But secondly, because the same reasons to bring war to happen are the same ones that habitually move societies, right? And this is something that should boost even a civic education to say what it means to be in a certain way, that is, your individuality is important, but up to a certain point. And yes, subjectively speaking, it's hard. It's obvious that your individuality for you matters more than for others, but that's exactly also the point, that others do not give a damn. You may even believe that, that life is priceless, but in the way humans act in the world, ever since it exists, they do give a price to life. It's hard to say it, it's hard to accept it, but it's always been so. It's not cultural. It's not about that guy's evil or is good. It has absolutely nothing with that. It's simply how we do things, and that's why you open history books and you read of millions and millions and millions of people, of innocent people, most of the times, unfortunately, that make this end. But trying to sort out the thing, which doesn't mean to justify senseless massacres of innocents or anything at all, on the contrary, but it's helping you to define better when that is the case, and when, you just have to do something because otherwise others could even die in a greater measure. And this is all overly complicated by the fact that evidently we do not reason humanly universal terms altogether. So to make a complexive to be an infallible calculator that decides what always is best, because it's pretty damn hard to say it in the first place, even just historically ex post. But think about what this means, because von Clausewitz tells us, if you do not do this, it's going to be worse. And if an average person listens to this says this guy is nuts, is a bloodthirsty maniac. It's the other way around. It's you that, by ignoring what the deal is, can actually let, as it always happens, people die without, not caring about politics makes you kill people, right? You do participate to that. It has nothing to do with who you are, what you do, what you believe in. Nobody cares. That's the crude reality of it. And you ignoring that for making yourself feel better is just the measure of your failure. That's why these works are important, because they really make you realize, make you think beyond the horizon, beyond what you can naturally and genuinely, even positively think. Because what's the point of believing that humanity is all wicked, but there is no good in it? Of course, every person is both in different measures. We may think we are actually worse than, in the sense that that it's always more difficult to do something well than simply not caring and letting everything go, turn into a disaster. But it's fundamentally the same reason why we do anything in the first place, even just evolutionistically speaking. How do you think we behave the way we do? Because there is a point at which you cannot stop ignoring reality, and you have to move, otherwise you die. And we accept it without complaining that someone imposes it on us, because we realize that we have to do it. But that's like a terminal stage, because we could do infinitely better and advantage ourselves constantly, and we just, by laziness, by inertia, even that's a physical principle, if you want to go as far as that, we do not do. But aside from these philosophical considerations, von Clausewitz, of mine, because von Clausewitz doesn't rightly stop to, he simply makes you understand the thing, but that's his genius. Then I'm just commenting it. But so as we've seen, this succession of moderate marches even can produce that, or these enormous losses on a regular base. And Clausewitz says, at the actual scene of war, want of food and shelter, bad broken up roads, and the necessity of being in a perpetual state of readiness for battle are causes of an excessive strain upon our means, by which men, cattle, carriages of every description, as well as clothing, are ruined. This touches many important historical aspects we have already discussed many times. We've seen the problems of supplying the troops, sheltering them, making them march through fit roads and so on. But there are other interesting aspects that, as we were saying before, are also more psychological. This perpetual state of readiness for battle that of course translates itself into material situation, but that is also psychological. How many times we hear, at least that's a good thing, one of the few realistic things that are said at a popular level about World War I. This terrible time, not during the charge against enemy trenches, but specifically the waiting of it. That is something that psychologically wears you out dramatically, and that's absolutely true. The greatest strain that you get, you could even die for it, definitely being traumatized or even physically impeded, is psychological. Right, and this is something we see even from ancient world. We know of people that got nervously blinded by traumas, by things that maybe these people had not even been scratched, but they saw things and they were in situations that broke them forever. And we pretty damn well know, medically speaking, how these things happen, unfortunately, even just by modern standards, modern science, medicine sources, and so on. And so, yes, this is our thing of clothing that I like to insist much on when people are so obsessed about the uniforms and every single button, how it's precisely. Well, to simply say that after a few months of campaign, there is no uniform anymore. Right? Do not think that, you give a soldier a uniform and then he goes a campaign and it works for it. There is no physical uniform after a few days of a few months of war. There is not. They are dressed with anything they find, and the rest are just rags, right? And with all the consequences you can imagine for comfort, for health, for hygiene even. And von Clausewitz says, it is only commonly said that a long rest does not suit the physical health of an army, that at such a time there is more sickness than during moderate activity. No doubt sickness will and does occur if soldiers are packed too close in confined quarters. This is another very important thing. We'll have to make actually a video specifically on it, because that tells you so much, even just from a strategical point of view, where how armies encamped, but also it gives you the measure of how much, together with the space, how much even just logistical needs are required just to make a camp work, in which conditions and so on. So that tells you the dramatic level of organization of armies, even just in ancient and medieval times, and let alone think about today, and how much it costs, right? And why war costs the hell the way it does, just from a logistical point of view. Let alone all the rest. That is, people die, in fact. But the same thing, von Clausewitz says, would occur if these were quarters taken up on the march, and the want of air and exercise can never be the cause of such sickness, as it is so easy to give the soldier both by means of his exercises. So there's naturally a camp life. It must be kept up, a certain, activity, but it's important to distract, even just psychologically speaking, as we were saying before, together with the most sad physical needs of not being too close, having enough, hygiene in camp, and so on. These are things that keep men alive, right? We know it. Psychologically speaking, they would be broken and consequently defeated. Then von Clausewitz says, only think for a moment, when the organism of a human being is in a disordered and fainting state, what a difference it must make to him whether he falls sick in a house or is seized in the middle of a high road, up to his knees in mud, under torrents of rain, and loaded with a knapsack on his back. Even if he is in a camp, he can soon be sent to the next village and will not be entirely without medical assistance, whilst on a march he must be for hours without any assistance, and then be made to drag himself along for miles as a straggler, right? Now, especially when you're young, that even a simple fever, makes you lay down. You don't want to, go up anymore because you feel destroyed. You just think, in our lazy lives, what it means to be, as it happened on a regular base here, to be kilometers distant from any shelter and feeling like that. This was daily business for these people, right? Or at least it could have happened very, very easily, right? And there were no antibiotics at the time. So, and think even how von Clausewitz died, actually. And in fact, he writes also how many trifling illnesses by the means become serious, how many serious ones become mortal. Let us consider how an ordinary march in the dust and under the burning rays of a summer sun may produce the most excessive heat, in which state, suffering from intolerable thirst, the soldier then rushes to the fresh spring of water to bring back for himself sickness and death. Right. There are beautiful examples that I've even met. Actually, I haven't registered them in the work, but they're fascinating about this heat strokes, fundamentally, of people that basically died because of heat, of exhaustion. The organism at a certain point collapses, right? It goes off. It's very simple. If you don't drink, if you are overheated, if you are, overly shocked by, all the adrenaline, what you've seen in these battles, that are something that I hope, none of us will have ever to see. That's something that, the brutality of it is, and you would think that, I don't know, we're talking about Napoleonic times where there was ricochet cannonballs that smash into your thing, but the same thing exists ever since we know warfare exists, right? So if you think that you are, you're physically or fit or courageous, that is gonna go. Just set foot on there, and see what it really is. It's something you're literally wiped out. And the individuality of it is what we have to erase from our mind, right? Armies work all together for reasons that go far beyond what you can individually do about yourself. And this is something very, very disturbing, evidently, because we instinctively crave to think that we are protagonists, we are heroes, we are masters of our own destiny. But the truth is that we just find most of the time certain living conditions that do not make us strain too much and then die, and that's basically our lives. What von Clausewitz is telling us between the lines is, if you want to do something great, you have to accept this kind of risks, which can really be, and that it's connected to what we were digressing on before, in the sense that that's where responsibility comes from. There's not there's no end to the best you can do. Even if you, of course, are not able to achieve it, but still there is an extra step you can take, and it costs. And the fascinating thing is that the more you go on, the more it costs proportionally, right? It's not that you can gradually go there. No, you're crushed. And what we think we do in our own lives that seems so, demanding is actually nothing, right? We are actually disgusting, especially if you look from an individual point of view, historically speaking. The further back you go in time, of course, the less effective means were, because, of course, now we can wipe out from the face of the earth anything that lived, even just 200 years ago. But the question is, the individual, exactly because primitive societies failed at being effective altogether for our own standards, right? Because for their own, they actually worked pretty well. They had a much higher dramatic individual capacity. This individual capacity was limited because it is limited, right? We've explained many times why the soldier is superior to the warrior. There is no doubt of any sort to that. But it's not a matter of individual superiority of the soldiers. It's a matter of collective superiority of the soldiers over the warriors, right? But as far as the individual is concerned, naturally there is more. And naturally everything is in relative terms because, well, now I'll have to talk about this clearly and in a dedicated video, because it has to do with things, I don't know if you ever, I never done it, at least I know what it is, things like the Deadliest War. Those can be, minimally interesting as far as the reconstruction of the thing of the individual can be, but when we talk war, real war, we're talking about something completely different. And understanding that makes us better. That is, and better at every level. That's where the Clausewitzian Trinity stands for. It's not about knowing about war. What do you think you do with that? You can win wars better. Yes, you can, but you can still do. Hopefully, you will not have to do it, but it will still have an equal important effect from a political or social point of view. So, we have read this part of the sickness. And then von Clausewitz says, it is not our object by these reflections to recommend less activity in war. Right? The instrument is and that's the thing, right? In spite of the fact that all these people die for reasons that appear stupid, in the sense that, once again, we're habituated to antibiotics. To us, a person that died, contracts and makes it worse for its own organism, because it really doesn't even have means. It has to go make it on foot, and eventually there's no medicine nor help. Is a miserable way to die. Well, welcome to what the history of mankind has been for most of its overwhelming majority of time, and how they had to cope with that, and we still cope with that, because at the end of the day, it's not that everybody can afford everything, and our wars, once again, fortunately today, most cases are very contained in that regard. So, but just think about, in proportion, something in relative terms that would engulf the world, like the Napoleonic Wars, that what would mean in reality. These things are actually very concrete. It's not that now we have the magic of modern medicine and certain problems are surpassed, right? And surprise, surprise, we haven't changed, not even by a comma, from a biological point of view, not just from people that lived in Napoleonic times, but also people that lived in Roman times, right? So the question here is, we are always the same, and we function always the same way, and what we have achieved to improve our condition is not something that we should be given for should give for granted. Not just for the knowledge of it, like, yes, because kind of worse before, yes, I get it. No, in the sense that you today still live in the same exact condition. Like, modern medicine, once again, is not behind the corner literally at every time. I stop here because otherwise it sounds as if I was, wishing something. But no, of course. But let's say taking the shock of it could help people to be more responsible and appreciative of what we had today, and seeing the thing in perspective is naturally way more important. So, as we were saying, it is not our object, von Clausewitz says, by these reflections to recommend less activity in war. In other words, it doesn't matter that people die because of these reasons in war. Because guess what? Wars are fought for reasons that are much greater. And this has nothing to do with the usual bullshit of the fat, rich politicians that send the poor, tender people of the people to die, right? This has to do with every freaking of them, right? And wars are always fought for reasons that can be horrible sometimes. It can be evil, can be wicked, stupid, but that are not to be explained just with that, right? And most wars are actually fought for reasons that are far beyond that, right? Once again, it's not that, making historical examples with evil can always be, in fact, counterproductive in this regard. But specifically, you cannot explain what happened in World War II just because there was a crazy guy named Adolf Hitler, right? He evidently catalyzed a great lot of stuff without which he would have not been able to do anything, right? But just for saying, this is not to say that World War I would have been fought in the same way or would have been fought in the first place. Single individuals can make the difference, but at the same time, there are huge systemic factors that do not invent things like racism or anti-Semitism or ethno-nationalism from a day to another, so that you can blame just the individual guy and all the poor millions of tender people sent at the point of the bayonet to die because you believe that it was actually like that. It doesn't work like that. It has never worked like that. If there is no support from the majority of the forces of a country, nobody fights a war, right? And this is dictatorships are not monolithic blocks that nobody can arch. There is always an interest, and this interest is exactly what we're trying to focus here. That is to say, why it happened, so that you cannot provide stupid explanations for historical concepts that are dramatically more complicated and complex in the first place to explain, right? So I repeat it for the third time. It is not our object by these reflections to recommend less activity in war. The instrument is there for use. This phrase is of shocking beauty. Like in these words, there is exactly that commitment and that sense of responsibility that just an officer, a general of the 19th century like von Clausewitz could be. Something we have forgotten from the 19th century was the sense of duty that permeated the Western military in a way that objectively, not before, not after, existed. That's objectively a primate of the 19th century. And von Clausewitz continues, says, and if the use wears away the instrument, that is only in the natural order of things. That is to say, if you think you have an army, you don't want to use it because you think that people will die on the march, you have already lost the war. That is, way more people have died because of you from your side just for an idiocy. Right, so it's not a surprise when von Clausewitz starts the Vom Kriege literally speaking of the humanitarian feeling in war waging as being a contradiction. Because if you really want to save more lives, what you have to do is to make that war dramatically but dramatically fast and dramatically violent, so that it all happens at the point and it does not go on and on, killing in interest of time way more people than it should have had. right? And this is a concept that today Western culture, that actually is what produced von Clausewitz, what produced these thoughts, is disgustingly, obscenely, shamefully forgotten of. And of course, people have always been ignorant, and what I just suggest is not to feed modern people with the illusion that they are actually educated or intelligent or capable or provided with certain specific value just because they are, study von Clausewitz. Then we will speak about what it is to be a Westerner. Because a person that doesn't understand this, to me, is not a Westerner, right? It's like, right, not because I give to the concept of Westernness an exclusivistic meaning, but because objectively it was the West that came up for this first, and then the others followed, because surprise, surprise, it's not that in China they work with Sun Tzu, but with all doctrines that are all derived from Marxism, from von Clausewitz. So this kind of even disgusting moral relativism of culturalism about thinking that everything is the same, it's just different and you can't understand. No, we can't understand everything. And a person that gives up the concept of thinking you can't understand everything, once again, is not a Westerner, because that's what we came up with, and that what the rest of the world agreed and learned and shares. And that's the reason why we can't cure people. Why we can't make planes fly, and much else. Let's say of more, spiritual value rather than just material. But the question is, it always passes through the material one as well, right? So whoever deems von Clausewitz to be a monster for saying these things is simply a stupid person, by definition, and here it's self-demonstrated, right? Just dialectically speaking. So, I like to stress this concept. I mean, I don't give a damn about what other people think about this, because the earlier you understand this, the better it is for you. And it may take time to understand, yes, but you get you really make a difference for yourself and the others if you get it. Right, and that's what I hear about a lot. And von Clausewitz, in fact, says we only wish to see everything put in its right place, and to oppose that theoretical bombast according to which the most astonishing surprises, the most rapid movements, the most incessant activity cost nothing, and are painted as rich mines which the indolence of the general leaves unworked. It is very much the same with these mines as with those from which gold and silver are obtained. Nothing is seen but the produce, and no one asks about the value of the work which has brought this produce to light. Which, honestly, I didn't notice this when I was reading, is also one, this is one of the single most human phrases von Clausewitz says. Right, he says, yeah, we all like gold and silver to shine, we think it's so cool, but what the sweat and tears of people that worked in the mine, or people who died in the mine, think about just in the 19th century, was like, even if it happens still today, unfortunately, in much better conditions, is about. This is what von Clausewitz tells you, which, relatively to what we just said, tells you how freaking aware he is about how much it costs, what the sacrifice that it takes to achieve that immediate, strong, intense action that is needed to spare other people's lives, right? Which sounds paradoxical, right? It's like those stupid slogans from the anti-war movements in the 1960s, 1970s, like, fighting for peace is like fucking for virginity. A person who says that is an idiot, and that is also the expression, in fact, of a disease, literally, of an entire generation of people who got completely deluded because of the alienation of the detachment from reality of what this whole thing is. But hey, that sounds cool, so let's repeat it over and over again. This is what basically our culture has turned into, right? And it is not to say the anti-war movement maybe have not been justified for else, or came, brought up some other stuff, together with the contact station, all this stuff, but in my opinion, a great part of that, like, it didn't even leave a trace, right? If not fanatism and ignorance altogether, and basically pride for mediocrity, which is something that I fundamentally cannot understand by the slightest. Because it does, this illusion that you can't give to everybody the same so that they can't feel, what's the point, right? Where do you teach them to do something about their own lives? This is what, a person that enlisted at 12 in 1792 in the First War of Coalition and died in the 30s of the 19th century after a lifetime spent exclusively about war, rising through the ranks up to the generalship and reforming also the Prussian army with important thoughts to and all the historical consequences of it, the unification of Germany, even the victory, the Bolshevik victory in the Russian Civil War. This is what teaches you how to do it, right? Not giving people the illusion that they are worth something just because they exist. On this earth, it doesn't function like that. In heaven, maybe, that works like that. But here, it doesn't work like that. Even if you wish for it, it does not work. You can even believe it, but it will not work. This is what von Clausewitz is telling you, which is the greatest way you can help a person. Not telling them lies, telling them exactly what life is all about, right? That's why actions are everything, right? So, as we were reading here, Lives and Works is very much, okay. So then von Clausewitz says, on long marches outside a theater of war, the conditions under which the march is made are no doubt usually easier, and the daily losses smaller, but on that account men with the slightest sickness are generally lost to the army for some time, as it is difficult for convalescents to overtake an army constantly advancing. Well, okay. Then amongst the cavalry, the number of lame horses and horses with sore backs rises in an increasing ratio, and amongst the carriages, many break down or require repair. It never fails, therefore, that at the end of a march of 100 miles or more, an army arrives much weakened, particularly as regards its cavalry and train. Now, we'll actually speak more of these specific topics also in other dedicated videos aside from the Vom Kriege, because there are, it's even one of these things going down, one horse being crippled or one wagon breaking one of its wheels, that can be, think about the theory of chaos, of games, it can be the cause of a defeat. Even if you don't realize it, because you can't follow how the whole thing interplayed with the rest. But this was known, there are even, sometimes I read, I think it was a 14th century English ballad that basically said that for a nail, a king lost his crown, right? And things like this really happen. Then von Clausewitz says, if such marches are necessary on the theater of war, that is, under the eyes of the enemy, then that disadvantage is added to the other, right? Because you're in the face of the enemy and you have to hurry up. And we have seen in the chapter, I don't remember which one it was, which explained that, of course, a march under, in the face of the enemy, even if it's the same exact march and the same exact round in a context of friendly territory, is dramatically more difficult. And that speaks for not just the physical, but the psychological dimension that are naturally always intertwined. And that gives you the idea of the preponderance of moral forces in war in general over the physical ones that are devastating. So what I would like to stress is that the psychological one is even worse, as we were saying before. And the two combined losses, and from the two combined losses with large masses of troops and under conditions otherwise unfavorable may amount to something incredible. And what we stress here is that even just a march can't kill. You see, I brought up this comparison between the march in friendly territory and the one on the face of the enemy, because the difference there is actually dead people, even if nobody has ever shot on them at that point, right? Because it's all that friction together in this massive, and the larger the army is, that von Clausewitz himself says it's incredible. Like how come all these people died compared to what we do, I don't know, an exercise in peacetime. If nobody shot even on us once. That's exactly what he's talking about. And he saw the freaking thing with his own eyes. Right? So, do you realize how important this is? Do you realize why I make these videos? Because honestly, like, we're talking about dead people, right? Even if it was, doesn't matter if it was even just one, it would be important. But here we're talking about something that happens on a regular base for reasons that it can't be, I don't know, liberating Europe from Nazi fascist tyranny, right? These are things that happened. People died, people lost their lives, families lost their dear one before these reasons. And beyond, and this is just as far as marches are concerned. So think about that, what war concretely is altogether. And von Clausewitz gives us the hard facts here. He says only a couple of examples. Excuse me, you're checking something. Only a couple of examples in order to illustrate our ideas. So, when Bonaparte crossed the Niemen on June 24th, 1812, the enormous center of his army, with which he subsequently marched against Moscow, numbered 301,000 men. At Smolensk, on the 15th of August, he detached 13,500, leaving, if it is to be supposed, 287,500. The actual state of his army, however, at that date was only 182,000. So we're talking about essentially less than 2 months in summer. Right, and you realize, here's the mathematical consequence. Von Clausewitz says he had therefore lost 105,000. Right, not just dead people, of course, as we were saying before, but do you realize how freaking much this is? This is basically more than 1/3. Von Clausewitz says, bearing in mind that up to that time only 2 engagements to speak of had taken place, because naturally that was still in a war situation, but one between Davout and Bagration, the other between Murat and Tolstoy Osterman, we may put down the losses of the French army in action at 10,000 men at most. And that therefore the losses in sick and stragglers within 52 days on a march of about 70 miles direct to his front amounted to 95,000, that is a third part of the whole army. So of all the losses, basically 10% were about actual combat coast. The rest were because of these trains. That is a pretty good example of what we were saying before. It doesn't end here, because von Clausewitz writes, 3 weeks later, at the time of the Battle of Borodino, the loss amounted to 144,000, including the casualties in the battle, which was a hell of a battle. And 8 days after that, again at Moscow, the number was 198,000. The losses of this army in general were at the commencement of the campaign at the rate of 1/150 daily. Subsequently, they rose to 1/120, and in the last period, they increased to 1/19 of the original strength. Which means that in 19 days, technically, had the thing maintained the same, the whole army would have been wiped out. So that is, if you wonder whether that 1/19 would have been you, well, you have 19 days to know that that will be you. Which, just think about it psychologically speaking, and just think about the fact that these men, like, it's not that they were, gaily walking, through the thing and saying, oh, let's just wait the time of doom. No, they were freaking exhausted, right? And they were struggling pretty damn hard to exist. So, as we were saying before, these were on average peasants drawn from all over Europe that surely, they were habituated to physical strains at a certain level and so on. So just imagine, it's not the word the mollusks as we are today, right? There were something tougher, just from a physical point of view. So just imagine what this could be like for you, right? Were you there? I'm sure I would pretty much give out, aside from the fact that I'm not fit. Like, I maintain my shape, honestly, but I should do much more physical activity, especially I hope this one. But in general, it's obviously not comparable to those time standards, just for the lifestyle, right? Because biologically, as we were saying before, we are still the same exact people of those times. So then, von Clausewitz says, the movement of Napoleon from the passage of the Niemen up to Moscow certainly may be called a persistent one. Still, so because they were naturally hurrying up, still, we must not forget that it lasted 82 days, in which time he only accomplished 120 miles. We've seen in the previous chapters how it's actually futile to move all these huge masses of men. And every day with that rate. And that the French, so it's basically more than a bit more just than 1 mile a day, right? So, and that the French, von Clausewitz says, the French army upon 2 occasions made regular halts, once at Vilna, Lithuania, for about 14 days, and then at the other time in Vitebsk, it is today's White Right Belarus, for about 11 days, during which periods many stragglers had time to rejoin. Right. This 14 weeks advance was not made at the worst season of the year, consider it too, as we were saying before, nor over the worst of roads, for it was summer and the roads along which they marched were mostly sand. It was the immense mass of troops collected on one road, the want of sufficient subsistence, and an enemy who was on the retreat but by no means in flight, because the Russians were striking back in the meanwhile, which were the adverse conditions. Of the retreat of the French army from Moscow to the Niemen, that is a thing, we shall say nothing, and in fact, yeah, because that is unspeakable, but the retreat from Russia. But this we may mention, that the Russian army following them, so the guys who were fighting at home, in their own homes, left Kaluga 120,000 strong and reached Vilna with 30,000. What do you think of the French retreat from Russia? Look, in fact, at what the Russian army that was pursuing them, the conditions in which they actually were. Von Clausewitz says, everyone knows how few men were lost in actual combats during that period, right? And that naturally was in much worse conditions. But it still wasn't for that the French didn't lose because of winter, just for the record. And one more example from Blücher's campaign of 1813, instead in Silesia and Saxony. A campaign very remarkable, not for any long march, but for the amount of marching to and fro. York's corps of Blücher's army began this campaign on August the 16th, about 40,000 strong, and was reduced to 12,000 at the Battle of Leipzig on October the 19th. The principal combats which this corps fought at Goldberg, Lovenberg, on the Katzbach, at Wartenburg and Mockern, that is in Leipzig, close Leipzig at least, cost it, on the authority of the best writers, 12,000 men. According to that, their losses from other causes in 8 weeks amounted to 16,000 of 2/5 of the whole. So as you understand, here we're talking about even smaller armies that here it gives you that altogether wear themselves out much less in proportion to larger ones, and this is the good example between the Russian and the German campaign here, because they illustrate how naturally the larger the army is, the more difficult it is to keep it together, to organize it, to make it work functionally. So in proportion, the losses are gonna be greater, but still, this is gonna still to have those armies, big armies concentrated, has, as we've seen in previous chapters, a military importance that is fundamental, right? Think about when we spoke about numbers and how the numerical superiority in conditions of, of very low asymmetry, like European armies were in the 19th century, actually meant, right, to obtain victory, of course. And then Clausewitz says, we must therefore make up our minds to great wear and tear of our own forces. We must make up our minds, right? And that is the single most difficult thing that a person can do. Make up your mind. That's the real, I can say the real enemy, because that would be an anti-Clausewitzian concept, telling you the truth. But it's exactly the greatest. If you want to really make it, that's what you have to work on. You can't stay inflexible, that one thing is that and it's always stay the same like that. If there is a necessity, you have to be able to change your mind, because otherwise, right, it's not proof of strength to be confronted with something and simply insisting with it. Because why? Because it makes you feel better. That's the worst service you can render to yourself. But also, you don't have to make up your mind here, for Clausewitz says, for something pretty serious, that is to great wear and tear of your own forces. That is to say, people are going to die. And you already know that. Like, it's not that you have to wait or to see, at some point you have 0 losses and sometime, maybe you're lucky and another 40,000. No, it's going to happen. It's going to happen on average, and it's going to be dramatic, right? And you're going to lose those numbers. So even if you actually were a heartless individual, doesn't care anything about his own men, which is hardly a case for a general, but still you have to understand that it's going to happen, and that you have to cope with it from a strategical point of view. That is to say, you have to do something with that datum. You can't say, because losses, as we've seen, are very high. Right, they're not simple losses. They're not something that we're talking. Especially the more important. This is the axiomatic idea that the more important your army is in terms of numbers, the more this is gonna affect it. So, in other words, the more you have committed yourself to this, and the more you're risking. And that is all the Vom Kriege, right? That is conceptually. One milestone, like if you understand that, first and foremost, you're already on the right track to get where von Clausewitz goes with all this and why it is important. And then he says, if we are to carry on a war rich in movements, we must arrange the rest of our plan accordingly, right? And above all things, the reinforcements which are to follow. This is, in fact, the practical side. It is to say, you already know you're going to have those losses. So it can be a big deal to put all those soldiers together, but it's not over, because you're going to keep losing them in significant numbers that probably you cannot afford to lose. Also because probably it's already a miracle that you could put so many troops together. Maybe they're not even enough at this point, so that gives you a pretty good measure how the risk is. But you also have to attempt to have reinforcements ready, because those are must arrive at a point. And there are other important concepts here. That is to say, also, you don't want an army to be too large, and even if you want to split it, then you have to coordinate that. So you need a specific chain of command. You have to rely on a specific individual. So it's all something that a person that has never commanded hundreds of thousands of people in the field definitely has, I would say, a tiny bit difficulty to understand. And since nor you and nor I ever did, or maybe some of you did, which is a possibility, or maybe I'm lying and I did and I don't want to tell you, but of course it's very unlikely. I just tell you to just stay humble about it, right? Just accept that there are certain things that are too great. I wouldn't say than us, but to simply make us pretend that we can't understand them straight away, and or that we may understand them at some point anyway, because they require an effort that sometimes we will simply not have the opportunity to even to afford in our own lives, right? And this passes through a lifetime of sacrifice. Ask von Clausewitz. But anyhow, I liked very much, honestly, this chapter. This was very interesting. Honestly, I'd say more than the one before. I mean, there are of course these ones of Märsches. They're very important, but this one strikes. This one punches you, right? It's hard. That's why I like it, because that's exactly where the moral force strikes and makes you realize better the thing. Next time you have this about cantonments, and maybe we'll do it in 2 chunks because it's a bit longer. But anyhow, I just hope that you enjoyed this video. If you did, please share it. Otherwise, leave a like or subscribe to my channel if you're interested in my upcoming content. And for now, I thank you heartily for listening to me. I wish you a nice time and see you next time. Bye.